welcome to Willow's SoulFire. Today, I want to talk about maintaining your wild. And from the title alone, it could be a couple of different things, so I'm going to walk down both of them a little bit. The idea of maintaining your wild came to me one afternoon when I was out I was in my flower garden, and I was having one of those days where I was feeling frustrated, irritated, and I was having more trouble staying grateful and positive and intentional than usual. And I'm getting better at recognizing it faster and redirecting thoughts that used to be able to keep me in that frame of mind longer than I wanted. And I know now that that space is temporary, and it's up to me to decide differently how I am feeling about a situation, a circumstance, a interaction when I have the choice to feel one way or another. And while I know and experience and have faith that the days, the times, the more often I spend and get to spend in that space where I can really be grateful and see more of the things to be grateful about than to be worried or anxious or disappointed in, the more that the good stuff keeps coming, because you don't leave space open for the indecision, and you are sending out the vibration that you get it, and you are welcoming all these things gratefully and feeling what is really important and giving that your gratitude and your priority. But there are still those days that you don't see it coming. You haven't prepared. You didn't put your spiritual armor on for the day, or put all the pieces into place for what you know makes the best kind of day. And when you haven't given yourself the space, or I haven't given myself the space to practice the things that I know are really good for my energy and my inspiration and my joy and my progress towards making my dreams come true. Those are the days that I struggle with the most, and it can spiral fairly rapidly if I don't recognize it early enough to turn it around. And this was one of those days. I was in the garden, my beautiful garden, and I got distracted by a thought of how our property wasn't what I expected it to be after we'd been here as long as we have. And I started thinking about the plans that we'd had for certain areas of the property, and how we were going to landscape it or move things around, or animals that I thought we would have by now, or I think what came to me about that point was less wild. So I caught myself, instead of feeling that things weren't the way that I thought they would be, that I would like them to be, that I imagined they would be, based on conversations or plans or dreams, or how much we would have invested by now, things like that. So I caught myself, and I, rather than saying, trying to reframe, okay, so let's not get negative, turn that ship as quickly as you can. And what came out was, what I really want to do is just maintain the wild a little better. And what I was thinking about as that came to me, that became my thought to turn that ship around, was there's a lot that I like about this, that I like wild, that I like natural, that I like maintenance free, that I like wild. But that there was a difference in the spaces that we domesticated, and what wild things didn't belong where we had determined was a domesticated area. So when we moved here, part of the property was landscaped. That's mostly immediately around the house itself, and it was somewhat, I'm gonna say, formally landscaped, but there isn't a lot of it. It was just, bark dust and a bunch of boxwoods, and I think that was it. So to me, boxwood felt formal and straight borders and everything squared off. But then much more of the property is wild and had not been maintained. Well, it's been maintained. So we've had, the weed whackers out there, and the tractor and the lawnmower, and trying to keep invasive species under control. But we didn't take additional steps to make it less wild. So in the course of the 6 years we've been here, I thought it would be less wild, but it's actually more wild because the trees are bigger, and the all the wild plants and seeds that have been spread by birds and critters and blackberry vines, and all of those things have just grown up, and they've crossed domestication lines. I was thinking about the thistles and the blackberries that used to be just on the hill behind our house on the other side of the seasonal creek, and how I wanted to cut all the blackberry bushes back, and so that they were on the other side of the creek, and that there weren't any thistles towards the house and in the lawn, and doing a better job of maintaining the wild. And I thought that was kind of funny considering all the books that I've listened to lately and the podcasts and the classes and discussions about unwilding or rewilding or retaming or finding our wild and braving the wilderness and preparing us to venture out and find the wild parts of ourselves that we let be tamed and be second nature instead of first nature. And why? And I got to thinking about, well, what's the definition of wild in this case, right? So I was thinking of blackberries and thistles and whatever else is growing crazy out there, and that it was wild because it was there first, or it was not being held back by expectations or barriers or fences or us cutting them back. They just do what they do, and the wind spreads the seeds and the birds spread the seeds and the bears poop the seeds out, and there are flowers in my garden that I have no idea how they got there because they weren't there last year, and either as wild or planted. So does that make them a weed because they weren't intentional? And it took me a little further down the path of weeds versus flowers versus plants and what's native and what's invasive, and how it's probably different at my house than it is at the neighbor's house. And then let's talk about people that live in the suburbs versus the country versus the desert. Things belong where they belong, and when they wind up somewhere we think they don't belong, they're wild. They're not contained. And I started thinking about if I had to give up parts of my wild to maintain an overall feeling of tameness, that I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want 100% or even close to that being landscaped and maintained and weeded and less welcoming to the wild animals and the wild insects and the birds and coyotes and bears and cougars, and I'm not willing to completely cut out the wild. But maintaining the wild to a degree that doesn't consume our domestication. And that really just means lawn and flower beds and driveway and house. That the things that we're trying to combat the wild with. And necessarily, of course, we're getting better at shelter and transportation and availability and preservation of food, that when completely left up to the wild and wilderness, chances of survival were considerably less. But what have we unnecessarily tamed or caged or controlled, domesticated, and what was the cause of that in whatever your upbringing was, or your parents or your grandparents or several generations back, that when you were born completely innocent, untamed, completely wild, that parts of you would become tamed fairly quickly and put under control of expectations of your family, of your society, of your neighborhood, of your country, of your ancestors, that you were taught and trained how to act or look or dress or behave in order to fit into standards and expectations of probably the majority of people that you we're exposed to on a regular basis. If you've been untaming, like I have been, like some of my friends have been, instead of retraining yourself or those around you to continue in the direction that you were going and you found for whatever reason no longer worked for you, what are you setting free and why? And what is the rule that you had to break in order to give yourself that freedom and that wildness that is more authentic to what your nature is? And I have periodically let that wild streak out, and sometimes it was intentional and sometimes it was full on breaking the rules, and breaking the rules was the wild part of it, not necessarily what I chose to do to break the rules. I grew up with someone that lived a very sheltered life, and her parents were very strict and had very strict expectations of her. And when she went away to college, she started breaking all the rules that she could, that she had been sheltered from or told that were not appropriate or allowed, was too risky. And I think she got really hurt because she didn't have any tools for that unwilding. She wasn't left to her own decisions previously, so everything became her decision, and she didn't know really what to expect for consequences. I used to joke that my dad gave us a lot of leeway and a lot of rope, and the amount of rope that he gave us was just enough to hang ourselves. And what I really meant was that I can't speak from experience of my siblings, only myself, but he trusted me to make my own decisions, knowing and understanding what the consequences would be, and that ultimately try it, but understand that there are risks involved, and you're on your own if things go wrong, or more often than not that he would be there to pull us back, but not because we were afraid of him or what he expected of us. We were allowed to be ourselves and try things and take risks. I guess because it was rites of passage, or better to learn in a safe space, or I don't know. It doesn't mean that I didn't do stupid things or make bad decisions, or end up just like he expected me to or wanted me to, or it wasn't about being perfectly behaved or following all the rules because they were rules because somebody made them and we had to follow them, but try out the rules. Do they work for you? Be safe. Yeah, he broke rules too, and he took risks. He didn't stick with age appropriate or common standards for maturity or ability to deal with something. We had cable TV, like as soon as it came down our street, which also was all the movie channels and unheard of access to, you know, R-rated movies and for that matter, PG movies that we weren't sheltered. I want to say sheltered, but that's not the word that I really want. We were exposed to those things, or we had the opportunity to be exposed to the things as far as age appropriateness. And in the 80s, when I was growing up and a teenager, for the most part, things that were PG or R-rated were so because of language or nudity, very short sex scenes, nothing or I can't remember anything as graphic as things can be these days. So he would prepare us for scary movies, and we figured out how to sit through uncomfortable moments watching a sex scene on the couch with my brother and friends and dad, and but he didn't feel that those things would cause any harm, or he wouldn't have made them available. And I know that. But the mildness of those things, we learned that it's okay to cuss and use bad words, but don't dare do it in front of your mom or grandma, but when you go over to this aunt's house, it's perfectly okay. And how to be discerning, I guess, but what then were the things that were still okay to do, and why? All from, or a lot from, his perspective, how he was raised, his experiences, and what was not going to be a barrier to our growth, our maturity. All of that being a lot of times in contrast to what we were exposed to and trained at our mom's house or at our grandma's house or school. And who and what rule makers were to be respected and why. What rules were made by people that no longer get it, that made them for the wrong reasons, or they were the right reasons at the time but no longer really applicable. All the forming what's wild, screaming, running, jumping, but still appropriate on the playground or outside or wearing a dress on Easter or not wearing things that were too revealing or using proper grammar or manners or respecting elders even if they didn't deserve it because they were in a position of authority. What wild did you leave behind?